Welcome back, everybody, and Happy New Year to you. Great to have you here. It was a really busy weekend. If you tuned into the channel, you saw a lot of breaking news. One of the big stories is what's happening in Iran. Despite the fact that there are new sanctions in place, Iran is continuing to test missiles. We have video that will show you when we have a chance to talk now to Colonel Cedric Leighton from the U.S. Air Force, retired, president of the Cedric Leighton Associates, joining us now from Washington. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Jamie. How are you today?
Good. Happy New Year. It seems like almost every holiday I'm here anchoring on the weekend, either North Korea or Iran decides this is a time to test fire missiles. And this weekend it was Iran's turn. It feels to me more that like it's more than saber rattling at this point, because they made the announcement that they have now developed one of these nuclear fuel rods. How big a development is that for Iran?
Jamie, that can be a really huge development, because what that means is there's a possibility of using that fuel rod, that nuclear fuel rod, to weaponize a nuclear weapon. And what that means then, if they couple that with a viable delivery system, that could then lead them to really pose a danger not only to the Arab states that are bordering the Persian Gulf, but also ultimately to Europe and potentially to the United States as well.
Okay, so now that you've frightened us, what do we do about it? Because the sanctions come and the sanctions go. There's 4 or more sets in place, and Iran continues to do whatever the heck it wants, and time passes, and they develop new and different material.
Well, the basic idea with Iran is that I think the only way that you can really deal with them is through a very strong position. We weakened our position just from a geostrategic standpoint by withdrawing our forces from Iraq. However, we are once again present in the Persian Gulf. The Fifth Fleet has been there for many years. They're headquartered in Bahrain, and so they are there to really make sure that those sea lanes of communication, as we call them, are kept open. And the Straits of Hormuz, of course, is a very important sea lane of communication, with 20% of the world's oil going through there. So it's in our interest to keep the straits open. Iran has threatened, as you know, to close the Straits of Hormuz out of one side of their mouths, and out of the other side of their mouth they say, oh no, we're not doing it, we're just testing our weapons to make sure that they can actually handle any type of contingency that might come up.
Right, but they could do that next week. They didn't have to do it at a time that the tensions are so high. The Fifth Fleet is at the ready. I mean, they're in a very vulnerable position right now, the Fifth Fleet. And I have to ask you this question, Colonel, because I asked a couple of my military experts that joined me over the weekend, why is it that we're the only nation that is poised to take on Iran if, in fact, they continue doing what they're doing? Where the heck are the other nations?
Well, it is basically a question of their defensive capabilities, and you know, one of the things that the Obama administration tried to do was they tried to make sure that that NATO was up to par in Libya. Now, that had actually mixed results. It was ultimately successful, but what the Libyan operation was designed to do was really show the Europeans that they needed to up the ante in terms of their defensive and offensive military capabilities that they'd neglected for quite a number of years. When it comes to the Iranian situation in terms of military power, the one nation that is best suited, that is outside of the Middle East, to help us is Great Britain. They are basically ready to help us with various military options that we may look at. Of course, there's also Israel within the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. So I think in the case of an Iranian scenario, if we work very diligently with these countries, we can probably gain support not only from Israel and Saudi Arabia. This would obviously is a case of strange bedfellows, but on the other hand, you'd have the United Arab Emirates, potentially Qatar, and potentially Oman, although those nations do have relationships with Iran, as does Bahrain. But those could at least provide some degree of basing for us. The Kuwaitis are also a distinct possibility. And, you know, if things go really badly, we could probably prevail upon the Iraqis to help us as well. Now, that's all very far-fetched.
That's an interest. I hadn't thought about that, but yes, you're right. Even though we're not there, you would hope that they would, in a sense, return the support and goodwill that we left behind. It's interesting that you bring up Libya, because without a doubt it was proper to go in and take out Gaddafi. Everyone seems to agree about that, but we now look at Libya and the transitional government, and it's pretty much a mess. And one of the things I learned over the weekend, I'd love to get your opinion on, is the fact that Al-Qaeda has gone into Libya successfully over the last couple of months. As many as 200 Libyans have been now taken on and converted to join al-Qaeda. It could be a hotbed for terrorism. What do you think?
Well, it could be, and actually they have provided a whole bunch of people. Libya has provided a whole bunch of people that have gone to al-Qaeda over the years. So this is not really a new development. It is just facilitated by the fact that the Libyan government, of course, has changed, and Gaddafi is obviously out of power. So what has happened here is the train has been accelerated, and with the acceleration of this train, al-Qaeda has a potential for getting new recruits out of Libya. Libya, like a lot of Arab states, has a very high youth unemployment rate, a comparatively low literacy rate when compared to, say, Western Europe or the United States. And it is one of those areas where, if you have nothing to do as a young person, especially as a young male in the Middle East, one of the things that beckons to you is the cause of al-Qaeda. And It's very unfortunate, but those are the kinds of things that we really have to look at in the long run when it comes to converting, if you will, the Arab world to look at things in a more productive way. It doesn't necessarily mean a pro-U.S. way, but what it does mean is certainly an anti-al-Qaeda way. And that's really what we have to look at, Jamie.
Sounds like we could add Egypt to that list, too, because we know that whole situation started with young people and social networking. And what do you think for the Middle East as a whole, that whole region? How do we get a grasp of moving things in a direction that we want? And what's your opinion on how the administration is handling it, if you don't mind my asking, given your extensive military experience?
Well, I would give them mixed reviews. I would give them a lot of credit, obviously, for taking down Osama bin Laden. I think it's both an issue between the Bush and the Obama administrations, that essentially the Obama administration furthered the policy of the Bush administration and was ultimately successful in carrying out the demise of bin Laden. When it comes to Egypt and the Arab Spring, I think in many ways it is a furtherance, again, of a Bush administration policy to tout freedom within the Middle East. However, when it comes to executing the policy, I think there were some delays that were not necessary. In particular, the 2009 uprising in Iran. That uprising in Iran could have helped our cause in the Middle East considerably if it had proven to be successful. And unfortunately, it was not. It was, of course, taken down by the government and by Syrian and Hezbollah forces that were supporting the Iranian government. And that is where I think the Obama administration was slow to act. When it comes to other issues such as the support of the actual Egyptian Spring, I think they did fairly well. And of course, the president's speech in Cairo was one in which he beckoned the Arab world to rise up, in essence, to promote a freedom agenda. However, that is easier said than done. And of course, when it comes to the various nations in the Middle East, once you start playing with one of them, then you risk that others develop a situation where the current political order becomes untenable. In some cases, as in the case of Syria, it's a great thing to see those people leave power. In other cases, like Saudi Arabia, while it might have its good and bad points, it becomes very difficult from the standpoint of our geopolitics to have a new government in a place like Saudi Arabia. And I certainly would hope that the Obama administration would be very careful in pursuing change in those areas.
Yeah, in Syria, not so fast. I mean, people are dying every day.
Right.
One of the last questions I wanted to ask you about Iran is, they've said they want to wipe Israel off the map. At least Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has said that, and I'm not even sure how much power he really has. The Ayatollah is the supreme leader, very old. I don't know if there's someone waiting to come in and what kind of relationship they'd have with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. They say they want to talk now, Iran. Is Iran somebody that could be talked to?
Well, I think their track record proves that, at least so far, they have not been someone that we could talk to. And that's very bad from an international diplomatic standpoint. But what it really points to is that in order to force these people to a negotiating table, whether it's Ahmadinejad or the Ayatollah or anybody else in power within Iran, you really need to do so from a position of military strength. That's why it becomes very important to have a presence in the Middle East, not only in places like Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, but also in Afghanistan and Iraq.
I agree.
Because what that does is it surrounds Iran, and if we could get a relationship with some of the other nations to the north of Iran, that would be even more important, because then it forces their hand, it surrounds them from a geostrategic standpoint, and that is really what you want to do with them. That first there'll be fits and starts with a policy like that, but what it would do is it would tell them, we mean business. It tells them that we are going to be there for the long term, and we have to keep in mind that these people think for the long term,
sure.
and they will only respond to people like us if we deal with them from a long-term strategic perspective that involves the use of a very precise military force or the threat of precise military force.
Yeah.
And that is where it becomes really, really important.
I rarely state an opinion, and no one wants the brave men and women who volunteer to serve to come home more than I do, but I did feel that Iraq was strategically a place where we needed to have a strong presence, like we do. We were in Kuwait, we're in South Korea.
Right.
I mean, we're at the ready in a number of places where we haven't had to be ready for a long time. Iraq still seems like a hotbed to me. I wish our eyes and ears could still be, and maybe we are through intelligence sources, one will hope. Iran, though, could develop this nuclear material, which they are, and nuclear weapon, which they probably will, and just hand it off to somebody else, some would say.
Yes.
Who?
Yes.
Who would they sell it to?
Well, that's a very interesting point. The biggest danger would be Al-Qaeda. There's obviously a relationship between Iran, Pakistan, A.Q. Khan being the famous scientist from Pakistan, or infamous scientist from Pakistan, who developed the atomic bomb for the Pakistanis. There's been cooperation with them. There was work also going on between them and Libya for a while until 2003, when the Bush administration stopped that. But the basic idea was that they could give Al-Qaeda a potential bomb, whether it's a dirty bomb or an atomic bomb, and that would be a very, very dangerous position to be in. It would be a very dangerous development for the world, and it is something that we should do everything in our power to prevent.
Whatever we can. I want to keep you, Colonel, for a second and bring Jeannie in. Jeannie's a professor, I should tell you, Colonel, at Iona College. And, I asked a general that I was speaking to over the weekend. Oh, actually, no, it was Dr. Waleed Ferris, who has written a very interesting book on the Middle East. And I said, it was New Year's Day, and I said, if you're sitting home today and you're hearing about these missile tests from Iran, why should you care? And he had a very strong answer: you really should care. And my question would be, for the younger generation that's looking at national security, I hope, as an issue in determining the 2012 election, or even what they do with their future, in a way to maintain the safety and security and freedom that we have here in this country. How much do you find that the students on campus are following these issues and care about these issues?
It's interesting. I'm sitting here listening to you and the Colonel speak, and it's fascinating, because I think students, when you talk to them, do really care. I mean, the world is small to them. It matters to them what happens. They really do have an interest. That said, it's not something, if you think about, tomorrow at the Iowa caucus, or the upcoming primary in New Hampshire or Florida, it's not something that we're hearing as much about, perhaps, as we should, from both the Republican and, of course, the Democratic side, which has been quieter. I mean, I'm thinking about, we've heard a little bit about, Rick Santorum, I think, if hours ago or a day ago said something about, potentially taking
right
some bombing action, But it's interesting listening to the Colonel, and I wonder, how much does he feel like we are missing out on a discussion as we go into 2012, given the economy and everything else domestically, about foreign policy and national security? I have to say, on my way over here, there was a fascinating BBC piece saying, now that we're entering the primary and caucus season in the United States, given what's going on there domestically, no one in the U.S. will be focused on national or international issues. And that, to me, is a very scary proposition, because, as the guest you mentioned talking to on New Year's Day, these are issues that matter to us an enormous amount.
Yeah, it matters. It does matter. And you know what I find so interesting, Colonel, and my hat's off to everybody that signs up to be a part of our military. The war now, especially with our drone basically ending up in Iran, I mean, I still don't understand exactly how it got there, and if they were able to take over control, then we really have a lot to be concerned about. When you sign up to go into the military right now, you really know where you're going. And you know that it's an escalated position because the weaponry is becoming more sophisticated, and so are our soldiers and Marines, our Air Force, Navy. You really have to know your stuff. And my hat's off to them for signing up and being willing to volunteer. My choice is to stay here and just admire them and say thank you on a daily basis. I do it a lot. I thank you for your service too, Colonel, and thank you for being with us today. Really interesting discussion. You share my concern, and I hope that we can all learn more and be vocal about it so that we can stay safe.
Absolutely, Jamie, and my pleasure being here, and the professor's right on. This is exactly what we need to be concerned about. The presidential election should be about national security matters because, and in addition to economic matters, because that is what this country is about. We are the preeminent power, and we need to stay that way for the safety of the world. Yeah,
certainly any action out of Iran, if God forbid something like that happens, the economy goes south. So they're a little bit tied together. Thanks for being with us. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, what an interesting discussion. I feel like I could write a book report on this one.